Good evening, everybody. And I'm Sven Burkertz. I co-edit AGNI with Bill Pierce. And we're here tonight to celebrate the release of AGNI 94, which is, I'll explain in a minute, is a hugely ambitious and somewhat different enterprise from others. Usually, I've been present over the years for dozens and dozens of launch events. And, of course, I love the real thing. I love standing in front of a crowd and listening from within a crowd to all that transpires. And I really do hope and assume, I guess, that we're going to be back to that before terribly long. But I have to say, for tonight's event, Zoom has certain advantages, because when we do real-time, real-life launches, or whatever we call them, we're able to bring together people from the immediate area. And if we're lucky, we can inveigle somebody to come up from New York and so on. But we're pretty much confined in that way geographically. But as this is a very special issue, and it's an issue that embraces the globe in a sense, I think it's befitting that we're able to bring together people from different parts of the planet. Maybe that's the best way to put it. So let me just say a little bit about this particular issue. For the past year, and I think longer than that, our editors Shuchi Saraswat and Jennifer Kwan Dobbs have been working on a hugely ambitious enterprise, and have, with a great deal of care, they've put together a special portfolio on translation. The title and the guiding concept was Futures. And to put this together, the biggest portfolio that AGNI has ever ventured, they solicited work from writers and translators from a huge array of language cultures, and with some considerable success. From our end, from the inside, it was just fascinating to watch how this came together piece by piece, writer by writer, translator by translator. It was a little bit like watching a ship being assembled in a bottle with tweezers and getting everything into place. And then there is the moment of triumph, when the string is pulled and the ship stands up and everything sails away. And I think tonight, the launch, the publication and the launch are that moment. The thing we're celebrating, breaking the bottle over the hull. So it's Zoom, which has the advantage of collapsing distances and smoothly rendering distance moot. It allows us all to be here, and I'm really looking forward. And 1 second before I pass things along, I have a few sort of slightly more practical things. Just a few things in the way of announcements. And the first of these is that at the top right of your screen, as you know, you can choose either speaker view or gallery view. And if you stay with speaker view, you get the view that's curated as we intend it. Also, as you'll see in the chat, there's a special code for subscription orders tonight, and we're offering 20% off with the code, which is PN06. You remember that, PN06? And finally, I do need to thank Boston University and the National Endowment for the Arts and the Mass Cultural Council for their generous and ongoing sponsorship of what we do. So welcome.
Hello. Welcome and thank you all in attendance this evening. It's my utter pleasure to introduce the poet Marianne Chan for this evening. And I just want to say a few brief words before I provide her more formal biography. I'm so drawn to Marianne's work beyond the scope of this issue for how multifaceted it is and how I've witnessed it continually developing in these confounding and gorgeous ways. I admired Chan's work from her first book called All Heathens, which came out in 2020, and how it rethinks colonial knowledge and highlights a diasporic ability to thwart successful, permanent forms of conquest in this sometimes violent world. When we received Marianne's submission for issue 94, I want to emphasize that her work for me took on another very distinct, brilliant view of the ways we live and attempt and fail to contain our personal histories, and how a place, a flat place, a specifically Midwestern place, can have autonomy in language, can actually speak back and shape how we come to know ourselves, how we come to conjure ourselves in and outside of the frames of cultural belonging and estrangement as a person of color growing up in the contemporary United States. What I'm trying to say is that Marianne Chan creates a cruel geometry out of language, and I am astonished by her range. Sorry, that's my child screaming. He's going to bed. Marianne Chan grew up in Stuttgart, Germany, and Lansing, Michigan. She is the author of All Heathens by Sarabande Books, out in 2020, which was the winner of the 2021 GLCA New Writers Award and the 2021 Ohioana Book Award in Poetry. Her poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Poetry, Kenyon Review, New England Review, AGNI, and elsewhere. She's currently pursuing a PhD in English literature and creative writing at the University of Cincinnati. Welcome, Marianne Chan.
Thank you so much, Jess, for that wonderful introduction. I was unmuted during that and I was afraid you guys could hear me gasping and breathing. But I'm so excited to be here to celebrate with everybody, to celebrate AGNI 94. So I'm just going to read some poems for you today that are from a new manuscript that I'm working on. This project is about a town called Biddle City, which is a fictionalized version of my hometown, which is Lansing, Michigan. And because when I think about Lansing, I think of it as being really flat with a lot of short buildings, a flat landscape. I wanted to kind of convey that flatness in the form. So the poems in this manuscript are mostly prose poems, and some of them are formal poems that have been flattened into prose. So the first two poems that I'm going to read are that are published in AGNI, which I'm really excited about. The first one is called The Shape of Biddle City. Everything is a rectangle in Biddle City. No triangles, no circles, not a one. No swirls, squiggles. For example, this poem is a rectangle, and outside this rectangle is a bigger rectangle. Inside that rectangular room are other four-sided shapes, windows, computers, televisions, floor rugs. Even the lamps are rectangular cuboids. No building higher than the Capitol. No person higher than the next person. Everyone remains at a level height. Even the Biddle City accent is flat-backed and angular. There's a record store in East Biddle called Flat, Black, and Circular, but that's East Biddle. There are small circles as you move east. Today, I am at Fleetwood Diner where I drink a square cup of coffee. Rectangular drops dribbling down my chin. A rectangular bus buses by. Rectangular light enters through doorways. Rectangular people do not dine near me. I have my own four corners inside which I sit. Summers in Biddle City, 1999. Remember that first summer in Biddle City, that sweaty Michigan boredom, The sprinkler I dragged around the yard. The grass so yellow we thought we'd find phone numbers in its leaves. Television all day long. Commercials about the Cedar Point amusement park, the power tower, people dropping from 240 feet. Oh, how I wanted this, to feel a drop from under me that year, to have my body correspond with how my heart felt, a constant sinking into the Michigan soil. Instead, my 11-year-old body was firmly planted in a duplex apartment with you and a giant container of cheese balls. Mom wouldn't let us go anywhere, so afraid she was of civilian kidnappers, kids with guns. We had moved to America the year of Columbine, barely teenagers. Despite our mother's fear, sometimes we snuck off anyway to JJ Video for a thrill, bought licorice, gazed up at the new releases. We too felt newly released. When we arrived home, Mom made us sink to the ground, knees to the tile floor, a punishment, until she was sure we had truly returned to her. And this last poem I'm going to read is a prose pantoum. And so for those of you who don't know what a pantoum is, it is a poem made up of quatrains, so 4-line stanzas, and the second line and the fourth line of the first stanza become the first and the third line of the following stanza, and that pattern, the repetition pattern continues throughout the poem. So this last poem is called Winter Flowers in Biddle City. My brother in Biddle City was famous for making the winter flowers bloom. He was 14 years old, was famous for making a big fuss in town. He was 14 years old. Football players watched him, a big fuss in town. This round-headed boy, football players watched as the flowers rose from snow. This round-headed boy didn't know that he was strange as the flowers rose from snow. The crowds of people whispered, I knew this family was strange. What's with this boy who loves flowers? The crowds of people whispered, football players tied him up. What's with this boy who loves flowers? My brother in Biddle City, football players tied him up as the winter flowers bloomed. Thank you so much.
Hello. It is my great pleasure to introduce Melissa Chadburn, whose brilliant singular essay, Elsewhere, you'll hear a bit of tonight. Melissa's writing has appeared here, as well as in the LA Times, the New York Times Book Review, the New York Review of Books, Long Reads, Paris Review Online, and many, many, many more. Her essay on food insecurity was published in the Best American Food Writing 2019. She's done extensive reporting on the child welfare system, which I'll hear a bit about tonight, and appears in the Netflix docuseries, The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. She's a PhD candidate at the Creative Writing Program at USC. Her debut novel, A Tiny Upward Shove, will be published with Farrar, Straus, and Giroux in the spring. Melissa says that her mother taught her how to sharpen a pencil with a knife. And I think as you listen to her now and read her works to come, of which I hope there will be many, you'll appreciate exactly what that means. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. This really was one of my favorite things to write. So I will be sharing it with you all. I'm also going to share my screen because I have some images to accompany this reading. So let's hope this works for everyone. Okay, great. Halloween 2019. Halloween 2019, snow-dusted basketball courts, liquor stores, graffiti, greasy spoons. I float past it all in a cab. The billboards, the sides of buildings painted with old ads, Cools, 7-Up, small neon cardboard squares with black block lettering wired around telephone poles, we buy houses, bed bugs. The South Side is the Chicago of my imagination. Pavement pounded by kicks and double Dutch, Cinderella dressed in yellow, hip hop and songs about big pimpin' and drug lords went upstairs to kiss a fella. The streets haunted by 5-0, kids in bathrooms waiting for Candyman, made a mistake and kissed a snake. Mostly apartment buildings, some houses with wood planks and aluminum foil in the windows. No one sits outside anymore. When we get to the concrete building, I ask the cab driver to come back for me in an hour. A security officer sits at a desk with a phone and a clipboard sign-in sheet, walkie-talkie in her hip. The place is cold. There's a stairwell behind me, a heavy metal door with a small steel meshed window in front of me, a couple of vending machines amid a loud electric hum. I sign in and the security officer calls my contact from her desk phone. We make small talk about the weather. The residential simulation lab I'm here to see is a partnership between the Child Protection Training Academy at the University of Illinois and the Department of Children and Family Services. The hope is that it will better prepare social workers for the types of things they'll encounter in the field. One part is called Dirty Apartment. There's also a hospital room and a courtroom. One set of parents, played by actors, are repeatedly investigated. I'm told that from the moment they enter the property until the moment they leave, they have to stay in character. Like actual parents, they collect their tempers in the parking lot before entering and exiting their fake dwelling each day. My tour guide is a retired social worker. She's wearing a pantsuit and gold-rimmed glasses. I ask if she remembers the first time she went into the field. She laughs. Oh, I'll never forget. They sent me out to Robert Taylor Homes. Whew, I used to spend all day running up and down those steps. I grew up here. I had uncles and cousins who lived there. I knew that if an elevator comes down and it's filled with guys, you take the stairs. Do you wish you'd had something like this when you were in training? Oh, Lord, yes. She walks me down a long hallway and opens the door to Dirty Apartment. The fridge has a Xerox photo of a blank-faced gray pit bull taped to it, plastic mounds of dog shit, trash and paper sacks on the floor, a small round table covered in empty plastic soda bottles, wine bottles, half-full prescription bottles, laundry detergent and dissolvable pods, dirty dishes, roaches in the sink, electrical cords hanging from the ceiling, a bare mattress on the floor of a child's room, big old television, tea ring on the dresser, mattresses on the living room floor covered in blankets, pillows, and clothes. Another mattress is pushed up against a wall opposite a framed certificate of service from the VA hospital. On one of these mattresses, half hidden by a pile of clothes, a baby doll, to represent a real baby, sleeps on her back. In LA County, where I live, co-sleeping is one of the leading causes of child fatalities. Over the past 3 years, more than 200 infants under the age of 1 have died as a result of the unsafe sleeping practices. Each year in the US, about 3,700 babies die sleep-related deaths. Closet. The door has a slide lock added up top and another below on the handle. I open the closet. Inside, hanging from the knob, is a pink plastic rope, loops at each end, the diameter of child-sized wrists. The walls, at a toddler's eye level, are covered in stickers. The floor is littered with broken crayons and remnants of snacks. Smell, that's what's missing here. I've lived in apartment buildings with roaches and stale diapers and have recovered dead pets from vacant units and shelters. Smells will betray you. My obsession with my past is always lurking behind, below, above, within me. Contorting its face, the ghost whispers its schoolyard taunt, pushing me forward. How many doctors does it take? 1, 2, 3. Once I entered foster care, I was afraid that the scent of my Filipino upbringing would cling to me, announce my presence. Afraid I smelled of oxblood stew or fried fish heads. My job in that home was to be inexpensive and out of the way. My foster mother had no sense of smell and hence no sense of taste. She found it perfectly acceptable to serve boiled skinless chicken breast for dinner every night. I picked up the food and wondered if this was the taste of whiteness. I see my mother here in the Chicago lab apartment, screaming on the sidelines of my life, rooting for me, taking me along to her classes at UCLA, teaching me to read, beating my multiplication tables into me, but mostly hoping that somehow things would be better this time around. I see her and all the dead relatives and soldiers back in the province of Manila, my uncles and aunties and brothers who would later die from AIDS or heroin, strangled by all that want. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled and honored to present Futures, a portfolio of translated work, which I had the pleasure of co-editing with managing editor and nonfiction editors, Shuchi Saraswat. The largest folio in AGNI's 5 decades of publication, Futures showcases 35 translators, 37 writers, prose and poetry, in 21 languages and across 3 centuries. Co-conceived 2 years ago, before the pandemic struck, and in consultation with Chris Merrill, Jill Schoolman, Asfaha Bemnat, Johanna Domakosh, Ellen Elias Berzak, among many others, it emerges out of Shuchi's and my abiding interests in translation, and in part, as deeply felt response to our colleague Sven Burkert's essay, I Write This as the Amazon Burns. Burkert's ponders, quote, even the merely dire, what an expression, is a prospect to be grieved. So many things will no longer exist, either at all or as we knew them. But how intensely will we mourn? The prospect of collaboration is one sliver of light, but how much will that avail? Our futures depend on each other. While editors are not forecasters, we are deep listeners, as our own Bill Pierce so astutely says. And listening to this gathering of astonishing poets and writers is to lean toward the most wrenching challenges culminating into our 21st century human condition, the furnace of climate catastrophe, perpetual wars, rising ethno-nationalisms, the disappearance of languages and cultures, urgent or forced migrations across borders. How are poets and writers drawing from the past, charged with the necessities of the present, to envision and give witness to collective futures? This is a portfolio with weight, the weight of histories, the bendings of time, and a shared feeling of what's at stake. I couldn't be more proud and privileged to co-edit with Shuchi, to extend AGNI's commitment to a cosmopolitan perspective and embrace of all writing that's singular and vital. I couldn't be more honored to do this work collaboratively with my colleagues at the masthead and with all of you here tonight in the hope of widening that sliver of flame. One of the revelatory poets from Shuchi's and my portfolio is Hussein Ahmed, who I'm delighted is going to present his powerful self-translated poem, Mine. When Shuchi and I first read Hussein's poem, we were gobsmacked by its voice. To translate oneself is to unstitch and resew one's language into another, and it's a very difficult task. And yet Hussein's nimble rendering makes self-translation appear so effortless. His poem from the Yoruba is a profoundly felt encounter. Nigerian poet and environmentalist, he's the author of the chapbook, Harp in a Fireplace, published by Newfoundland in 2021. His writing has appeared or is forthcoming in Kenyan Review, Poetry, Transition Magazine, AGNI, Waxwing, and elsewhere. He is an MFA candidate in poetry at the University of Mississippi, and it's such a delight to welcome him tonight.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for curating this special issue, and also for having my work in it. This reading is dedicated to the 12 stars, to the 2 moons, and the sun, all of which I portrayed. And the title of my poem is Heal, which I self-translated to be Mine. And the poem is actually inspired by a visitation that I did when I was doing my program at the Obafemi Awolowo University, somewhere in southwest Nigeria. It's a town that the Yoruba people believe to be like the first place where light first emerged when God said, "Let there be light." So it's a town where we have this, as part of the requirement for the master's I was earning at that time, we are expected to go visit a place like environmentally degraded area, and it's called Itagumodi. And Itagumodi is a place that's been mined And so many people are suffering from the aftermath of these mining processes, illegal mining actually. So the title of the poem is called Iho, and I will read the Yoruba version first and then the English. Iho. Wọ́n gbẹ́ ilẹ̀ náà jìn tí omi fi sẹ́yọ sí orí yẹ̀pẹ̀ pupa. Àwọn ẹyin ẹ̀fọn fi inú ihò ṣe ibùgbé tí wọ́n sì ń rẹ̀ sí. Wọ́n ti wa òkúta inú ilẹ̀ náà jáde. Agbada tí ó gbé omi pamọ́ dògún, omi inú rẹ̀ sì di ìwọ. Àwọn omi ìṣẹ̀lẹ̀ ìrú náà fara yí ẹ̀yà irin tí ń bẹ ní abẹ́ ilẹ̀ tí ó jẹ́ ìpalára fún ẹ̀jẹ̀ ènìyàn. Mo rí ẹja tó léfò ní ojú odò láì ta àwọn fún. Ṣùgbọ́n kò sí ohun ìwúrí fún níní òkú ẹja. Àmì ni fún àwọn tí wọ́n tẹ̀rì sínú ihò tí wọ́n gbẹ́ nígbà tí wọ́n ń wa òkúta tí ó ń kọ yànrán bí ìmọ́lẹ̀ èso tó pọ́n. Ihò náà di ibùgbé fún wọn, ṣùgbọ́n wọ́n wú wọn jáde láti tún wọn sin lẹ́yìn ìgbà tí wọ́n fọ ara wọn fún àwọn yẹ̀pẹ̀ pupa náà. Lẹ́yìn àdúrà àwọn tí wọ́n kú, ilẹ̀ tí wọ́n ti ń wa góòlù náà kún padà pẹ̀lú àwọn ọ̀dọ́ tí wọ́n kéré sí mi tàbí jù mí lọ lọ́jọ́ orí. Orin ìfẹ́ ni wọ́n mú bọnu. Wọ́n wé àtùpà mọ́ iwájú orí wọn, wọ inú ihò náà lọ. Wọ́n kọ etí ikún sí ìkìlọ̀ àwọn òjìji wọn. That's like the Yoruba version. And then I'll just go straight and read the English version of the poem. It's titled Mine. They dug deeper. Water spotted from the red earth, mosquito larvae breed inside the open graves, poached of their glittering stones. The water tank rust, contaminated, underground sources laced with metals too heavy for blood. I saw fish floating on the river, but no nets were cast on it. There isn't glory in owning lifeless fish, omen of the future, for men who were buried in the well they dug with their own hands. In search of sapphires with enough light to ripen fruits, they did not find home until they were unearthed and then reburied after being washed clean of the red mud. Once prayers are said, the minds will be filled again with boys my age or younger, singing love songs, torches strapped to their foreheads. They crawl into the abyss, deaf to the warnings of their own shadows. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me there? Okay. My name is Shuchi Saraswat, and I'm a nonfiction editor and the co-editor of AGNI 94's Futures Portfolio with Jennifer Kwan Dobbs. In our introduction to the portfolio, Jennifer and I write about how we approached editing from a translated space. Raised on multiple languages and cultural traditions, translation for us is more than a literary process. It is also a way of listening, speaking, a way of holding together disparate selves. Tonight's musician, vocalist Ganavia Doraiswamy, creates from such a space. Born in New York and raised in Tamil Nadu, most of her childhood was on the pilgrimage trail, learning the storytelling art forms of Harikatha and singing poetry that critiques hierarchical social structures. Despite not being schooled traditionally as a child, she has earned undergraduate degrees in theater and psychology, and graduate degrees in contemporary performance from Berklee College of Music, ethnomusicology from UCLA, and creative practice and critical inquiry from Harvard. As a vocalist and multi-instrumentalist, a lyricist and interdisciplinary collaborator, she fuses South Indian vocal styles with jazz and contemporary music, blending Tamil and English with her rich and singular voice. She, quote, wishes to study and bring liberative techniques into this world, studies certain dyads, what empowers, who is disempowered, what heals, who is ailing, and wishes to wed the two. Unfortunately, Ganavia isn't able to join us tonight for a live performance, but she sent a compilation that she recorded in response to AGNI 94, specifically honoring tonight's featured authors. So listen to the words that you've already heard and listen for words you'll soon hear, and enjoy the performance.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ganavia. This is Rachna. Hi, everybody. We are going to make sound for you from Irvine, California. And I'm going to sing a couple of phrases that spoke to my heart that I know is in the upcoming issue. I believe that's 94, AGNI. What a beautiful name. Today you'll hear my voice, Rajna's brilliance that happens to emanate today through the guitar, and a trio with the, what do you call that machine? Dishwasher. The dishwasher. So yeah, and you know, I come from a tradition of singing poetry, and usually, you know, I know that we write songs and we sing songs, but today our offering is going to be breathing into the incantations of poets, poets that are with us today. So yeah, shall we? Okay. Yani mi quería? They dug deeper, water sputtered from the red earth. They dug deeper, deeper. Water sputtered from the red earth. They did not find home until they were unearthed. One's prayers are served, singing love songs, singing love songs. That's Hussein's mind. Young language with no verbs. Young language with no verbs. That's Daniel's apparatus 519. Singing love songs with love, young language with no verbs. Now chase rot, and if you die first, I'll come back. If you die first, I'll come back. I have my own four corners. This is Marianne's The Shape of Little City. I have my own four corners, inside which I sit. I have my own four corners inside, 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 inside. this living room where she just moved, her first own four corners. I have my own four corners inside which I sit. Now this is Carmen's Malaria. Hear me sing from the darkest corner of the room. Hear me sing, hear me sing, hear me sing. Hear me sing from the darkest corner of the room. This is Melissa's Elsewhere. On a certain day of many uncertain days, of many uncertain days, once prayers are said, singing love songs, young language with no verse, I'll come back. I have my own four corners inside which I sit. Hear me sing from the darkest corner of the room. On a certain day, on this certain day of the many uncertain days. We're gonna finish with a couplet from in the same pulse as bringing someone else from not the necessarily AGNI, but you may recognize this, especially those who are much more well-read than me. But this is Emily Dickinson's Hope is a Thing. Sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash a little bird that kept so many woes. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest seas, yet never even in extremity did hope ask anything of me. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in our souls. She sings a tune without the words. She never stops at all. She never stops. She never stops at all. She never stops at all. She never stops at all. I'd like to thank the brilliance of Rajna and the brilliance of the dishwasher and of course all of the poets that we had the opportunity of invoking today, and we hope to see you in the ether. Lots of love from Irvine.
I've been at the magazine I'm co-editor with Sven, and I've been at the magazine with him for 17 years, only in co-editing capacity for a couple, but there are a lot of us who've been here for a long time, and I don't think we've ever been done quite the honor that we were done by Ganavia in that music. Singing the words of the readers tonight, it's extremely moving. So thank you to her when she sees this. I am going to be introducing Carmen Stefan, who's going to be here with a short recording of herself reading in German, and Shelley Frisch, who is here with us. And their work is Mal Aria. It is an excerpt of a novel, and it's part of the Futures portfolio. Carmen is the author of 2 novels, most recently, It's All True, and then the earlier novel, Malaria. And among other awards, that novel won the debut prize from the Buddenbrooks House in Lübeck, Germany. Shelley and I have worked together a few times at AGNI. She is a spectacular translator from German, and she is very well known for her translations of biographies, Nietzsche, Einstein, and the Rainer Stach Kafka, which I keep the volumes of close. It's incredible work. For that, she won the MLA Translation Prize and the Helen and Kurt Wolff Translation Prize. She taught at Columbia University while serving as executive editor of the Germanic Review, and then chaired the Haverford Bryn Mawr Bi-College German department before turning to translation full-time. It's just a deep honor to have a relationship with her. She has brought us the work of Hushi Osten twice, and this time she had something up her sleeve. She had a test chapter that she had translated, and it turned out to be a gem. So we're honored to be the first to present this work in English anywhere.
Hello, I'd like to say a couple of words before Carmen's recording about this book, which is, I'll start by saying that something that Bill alluded to already, that I've had a very long and deep commitment to the works of Kafka, both his works themselves and this almost 2,000-page biography of him. And as you know, in his stories, there's a lot of shape-shifting. There's a lot of breaking down of barriers between human beings and animals. So imagine my happiness to discover this novel, which was given to me by the foreign rights director at S. Fisher at the Frankfurt Book Fair back when we went to book fairs before the pandemic hit. You're given a lot of books at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and you ignore most of them. This one I loved, I thought someday I'm going to do something with it. I guess this is that time. This is a very unusual story in that it's, as I think I mentioned just now, narrated by a mosquito. I should backpedal just a little bit to say that in one of the reviews of the Kafka biography, this one was written by William Gass in Harper's some years back. He called it half a man, half a metaphor. And he wrote the entire review of the Kafka biography in the first person narration of a bug. And here we have a similar kind of approach, a mosquito coming and stinging this person who, like the author, is named Carmen. She experienced many of these things in real life. She used to spend half of each year in Brazil. And in reality and in this fictionalized account, the malaria was misdiagnosed at first. And they thought it was dengue fever and it didn't need to be treated in any special way, which had dire consequences in real life and in this book. And so you have the unusual figure of the mosquito who is reluctant to bite our protagonist, our Carmen in this book, but bite he does, and instead of leaving, eating and running, you might say, he stays and follows her around and narrates. He's the omniscient narrator, essentially, of this book, and he's rueful about having introduced this malaria into her, but at the same time, he has a sort of a smug attitude toward his human subjects who seem woefully uneducated about the disease that he is introducing into Carmen in this book. And I think we wanted to circle back to Bill to have the recording played. Is that right?
Yes, here it comes.
Okay.
Hello friends, I'm going to read you the beginning of Malaria. Stellt euch die einfachen Fragen. Warum erschuf Gott den Menschen am letzten Tag und ein Insekt vor ihm? Warum steckt die Natur den Tod in ein winziges Wesen, wie ich es bin? Dann streicht das Warum, begreift endlich. Lernt mich kennen. Jeder Schwarm braucht ein Gehirn, das ihn lenkt. Nennt mich die Schwarze. Wenn die Nacht hereinbricht, schrumpfen die Menschen und die Mücken wachsen. Seht den Schatten an eurer Wand, die Fühler, die Beine, die langen Palpen. Hört mich singen aus der dunkelsten Ecke des Zimmers. Schlaft ein, werdet wehrlos. Ich bin da. Irgendwo schwirrte etwas, dann war es ruhig. Sie lag in Rio de Janeiro im Viertel Olaria in der Rua Catete, in der vor jedem Haus auf dem Fensterbrett eine Marienstatue steht, im Krankenhaus Salvino im Zimmer Nummer 284 in ihrem Bett. Der kleine Kopf im Kissen, auf das ein S gestickt war. Die Lider gelb, im Hals alles still, alles tot. Nur das Blut rauschte und rauschte. Ständig lächelte sie. Die Kräfte, die sich im Schmerz entfalten, waren nun die einzigen, die den Körper noch zusammenhielten. Sie hatte an diesem Tag noch kein Piratenschiff gesehen, weder Stimmen in ihrem Ohr, die sich in einer fremden Sprache etwas zuflüstern, noch das Schreien der Soldaten. Vielleicht war es ein besonderer Tag. Thank you. So take over, Shelley, and all my best to all of you. Ciao.
Thank you, Carmen. That was delightful to listen to. I hope some of you know German. I'm going to jump in. It's a different part of the same excerpt that her part was the first lines that you read in our issue of AGNI, and I'm jumping toward the close of that same excerpt. And it begins with a rather smug, almost arrogant mosquito telling us humans, putting us in our place for being so ignorant, because Carmen in the book has just been told by the doctor that she has dengue fever and it's nothing to worry about. It's not, in fact, malaria. The all-knowing mosquito has a different view of that. And so he starts with a little bit of science, but I learned a lot from that. And then we'll go back to her plight. The history of malaria is a history of false assumptions, starting with the Italian roots of the name. Mal aria, bad air, foul air. You people once thought pestilential fumes arose from swamps and entered your bodies when you breathed them in. And it came to pass that the land fell into the hands of the Atu. On that day, the air in the heavens mixed with the yearly Atu. These words are inscribed on an ancient Egyptian papyrus dating from 2500 BC. A2 was presumably the epidemic that recurred every year after the rainy season. Its name, malaria. You lit big fires alongside bodies of water, fearing that the bad air could build up in narrow, crooked alleyways. Architects in antiquity built wide streets and checkerboard-shaped settlements so that the deadly fumes could escape to the sky. In the city now called Agrigento, a depression was cut into the rocky ridge behind the city so that the febrile fumes of the plain could be blown out far into the sea. In the mountains of Calabria, Apulia, and Sicily, new cities and fortresses were constructed as people fled to higher ground to escape the fumes. Villages expanded up the slopes. A whole architecture of malaria arose, the traces of which are widespread to this day. It is an architecture of misunderstandings. How many died because they had no idea about the Black Cross hovering about them? All the German knights who came riding through the heat of Italy, streams of sweat pouring from them in their armor, which they then shed. No sooner did they bare their skin to us than they received the kiss of death. Every year, the malaria came back like a comet falling from the sky. The miasma theory took hold and became entrenched. In Rome, everyone breathed a little less deeply. When they saw a feverish patient, they'd say, "He is dying of the air." In speaking about the Campagna di Roma, where lemon trees blossomed, it was claimed that in summer, the birds dropped dead from the sky. Malaria invades your bones by way of the bread you eat and when you open your mouth. What could be a more formidable foe than the one hiding in the atmosphere? Breathe in, breathe out. You were so stricken with fear by the diabolical fever, destroyed so many people that you thought it was hidden in every teensy breath you took, that it could steam clouds and fog right up out of the earth. It only goes to show that you hadn't the faintest idea. Invisible within the invisible. This can be everything and nothing. Malaria was essentially stumbling around in the dark. So you invented things. Don't eat green bananas. Don't drink water if a green monkey urinated in it. In some areas of Ilha de Moraggio, they still say, don't bathe in water that's too hot or else you'll get malaria. And the people are convinced of the truth of that saying, as if it were scientifically proven. Even today, fog and morass are symbols of horror, though nothing menacing emanates from them at the outset. Against the backdrop of the miasma theory, however, fears grew in the heads of your ancestors, and they passed these fears down to you. It was unfathomable, impossible to grasp. There's still quite a lot you don't get. But you were right about one thing. The disease really does come from the swamps. We lay our eggs there, nub by nub. The little hatchlings have air in their cells. They are oval, pointed at the tips, and swim in the water like miniature canoes. Our larvae are reclusive and agile. At the slightest vibration of the ground, made aware of any sound, they dive down in a flash and wait for quite a while before resurfacing. You needn't have gone to the trouble of building new cities. You should have waited quietly at the shore for a few minutes until the tiny boats resurfaced, but your eyes were as yet unready to see them. Her body detached from her like a cherry from its pit, shedding the mind, forging ahead. Her body was leading a life of its own. It lay in fever, retching, quivering, striking back. The whole thing was happening inside her, but she had no control over it. In the rainforest settlements, feverish patients often envision a furious old woman, her long gray hair hanging in her face, floating over the sickbed, ranting and raving at them. Malaria is a mean and hoary lady. But there was a diagnosis, and now she knew where things stood. In 1 week, the doctor had said it would all be over, and the simple fact, the word over, that was her painkiller. Doesn't anyone know what's going on here? Does every tiny, barely noticeable action have to have consequences? Does everything have to be so causal? What am I doing here? Why haven't I cleared out as I usually do? Ignorance is bliss. You humans don't build relationships with your meals any more than we do. What an absurd idea. I'll get out of here. From now on, all of this is none of my business. With these thoughts in mind, I flew a couple of feet away. Then I turned around and slipped through a narrow opening just in time before the car door slammed shut. Thank you.
Hello, y'all. Good evening. My name is Esteban Rodriguez, and I am the Associate Poetry Editor. I'm so glad to be with y'all here this evening, and so glad to be introducing poet and translator Daniel Borzutsky. In Daniel Borzutsky's sophomore collection, The Book of Interfering Bodies, the speaker in the poem, The Book of Equality, soberly indicates that here readers gather to watch the books die, to see them as if they were thrown from an airplane or as if they had just suffered from a sudden shock to the body. While the ideas, concepts, and promises in books may die daily, Borzutsky's work continuously revives the belief that it is writers' and readers' duty alike to not only keep the idea of goodness alive, but to exhume the voices of those who have been wronged by the society and system that has sought to keep them voiceless forever. Borzutsky is the author of 6 poetry collections, most recently Written After a Massacre in the year 2018, Lake Michigan, a finalist for the Griffin International Poetry Prize, and The Performance of Becoming Human, which won the National Book Award. He lives in Chicago, and we are so glad to have his poem, Apparatus 519, live in our pages. It is with great pleasure that I introduce and welcome Daniel Borzutsky.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Esteban, for the introduction. Esteban, where are you? I'm breaking the fourth wall here.
I am in Austin. I'm probably doing the most Austin thing in doing this introduction from a bar.
Oh, okay. That is, I know, Esteban, I know your work as a brilliant poet, but here you're looking like a kind of newscaster, like you look like you're at an airport or something. And it looks very kind of exciting in the background. Anyway, thank you for that very kind introduction, for your work, and for to everyone at AGNI, thank you as well. And thanks everyone for sticking around on this Wednesday night when you could be doing 1,000 other things. All right, so I will read 2 pieces. The first from the poem that's in AGNI, Apparatus 519, and then one more after that. And they're both from a collection that I'm working on called The Murmuring Grief of the Americas. Apparatus number 519. Part, the whole, the dead, the corpse, the foot, the light, the flesh, the wage, the worker, the regulator. The lie in the code of the body, it broke on the edge of itself. I did not trust what I knew was true, that my eyes were blank, that my face was blank, that my bone was blank, that my body was owned by the shareholders, that the body was just meat now, that the body was just debt now, that time death was murmuring so loud and I could only hear the dead rain, the squeak, the buzz, the machine, the breath, the hatred, the fumble, the finger, the blow, the key, the sun, the brain, the bubbling, the cooling, the box, the space, the fold, the silence, the plank. I dropped all my capital in the supermarket. I was a young language with no verbs. I saw my stitches photographed from the inside. The police touched me frankly, so directly. They took me to the mask, the shield, the armor, the stone that's placed on the grave, the body that's left in the ground, the mountain they moved to the city, the beach that sunk in the city, the river that lost its water, the lake that lost its waves, the missing horizon, the missing halo, the children that disappeared into the face of time, tower, fire, the prose, the sticks, the woods. The foreclosed mountain we climbed before they threw us into another Wednesday, another Tuesday, another Monday. It's cruel to pray out loud, cruel to pray to a God who loves so discriminately, cruel to eat in public, cruel to sing when your neighbors can't speak or moan or whisper to, the birth that refuses to drop, the death that refuses to rattle, the leg that refuses paralysis. Trust the hammer, but lose the nail. Have faith in the hour, but not the minutes. Do not speak the failed word, the wound word, if it's witness to the frozen, the frosted, the fickle, the inspected, the inspector, the hopeful, the hopeless, the crumbling, the growing, the decaying, the rooting, the sowing, the consuming, the fluid, the formal, the industrious, the callous, the lazy, the blank at the moment of blank. Be empty again. Disguise your breath, disguise the sponge that sops up the water, disguise the body that destroys its bone, the body that fears its own fingers, the concrete flesh, the privatized flesh, the bank flesh, the murmuring blankness, the exhaustion, the suffering, the numbing, the weathering. I remember honey, but it's gone now. I remember seeds, but we have so few now. I remember the grass and the beach and the river, the bees and the ice, the lake and the mountain and its brokers, its board members, its collateral, its assets, its insurance, its expansion, its reduction. We cataloged the glaciers before they disappeared. We returned the earth to the investors, the anxiety to the anxious, the babies to the umbilical cords, the blood to the state and the bank. And I'll read one more. Sustainable growth, number 204. In the strange crowds, in the hungry village on the subway platform, in the history of the lyric, there are corpses everywhere. There are murderous cops everywhere. There are Uber drivers everywhere, corpses everywhere. In 2011, it cost $188 to produce an iPhone. The iPhone sold for $599. The profit margin was 69%. No one saw how the workers were chained along the stretch of desert road. They weren't corpses yet, but the bones of their cousins were scattered in the sand. The profit margin per iPhone decreased 6% between 2011 and 2017, yet overall revenues increased 200% because of a dramatic increase in production. There's a dead body in the dumpster behind the dry cleaners. There's a bouncing coyote in the dumpster behind the television station. There's a time for cooling down, and when the cop knocks on my door and asks me for my number, I identify myself, and he says, "Why did you shelter the body?" Then he sang a song that began with a conditional, continued in the subjunctive, ended with an imperative, an unanswerable question, an insult, a beating. The bed is not a place of peace. There are bodies under the bed. There are children hiding with the bodies under the bed, dead dogs, the history of our reproduction, the history of the skin they ripped from our arms, of the dead skin that fell from our hands, of the gunk in our eyeballs, of our hair follicles. We can analyze the corpses by talking about the circulation of capital, interest on loans, the social relationship of labor, the relationship between money and value, the regulation and deregulation of markets, the love between user and operating system about which so many romantic comedies are now made. Or we could talk about murder. It's indecent to ask why one man is so rich when another is so poor. Private property sustains itself while creating dead bodies and inciting the revolution of the proletariat. Unmelodious sentence. The white fathers are disenfranchised. There are corpses in the white fathers' closets. The average retailer makes a 400% profit on a dead body. It doesn't cost very much to make a dead body in countries without unions or labor regulations. To get back to a 3% growth rate, which most economists argue is necessary for sustainable capitalism, we will need to destroy ourselves and the planet and the fathers and the sisters and the earth and the sea and the dolphins and political frameworks of the global south and the overdeveloped north and the underdeveloped east. And if we need to use violence to save the planet from total global destruction at the hands of unregulated capitalism, then here, take this baseball bat and smash some windows, please, sang the president of the World Bank to the labor union. The revolution had already been commodified, but what had yet to be accomplished was the funding of a legitimate resistance movement to be built up, then obliterated by the state and its financiers. My neighbor retired with no pension, and now he eats rotten vegetables from the dumpster. He left his house one morning and forgot to wear his shoes. He forgot to wear his socks and forgot to wear his pants. He forgot to wear his shirt and he forgot to wear his coat. I'm sorry, he told his children when they found him with hypothermia near the river. I will never be human again. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for those poems. And thanks everyone for the work that has come before. My name is Mary O'Donoghue. I'm fiction editor at AGNI, and I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's closing reader, Che Yun. Che Yun is a PhD candidate in the history of science at Harvard University. She's from Seoul and she lives in Boston. Her stories have been published in Granta, Virginia Quarterly Review, Kenyon Review Online, and now AGNI. And her story for this issue, Rot, brings devastation in that one single syllabled title. The sentences in Rot are similarly audacious because they are unadorned. Che Yun interleaves the story of one relationship with a history of relationships that presiding relationship demands be exhumed. It's a bodily story. It's a story of skin. It's a story that opens on another story of skin, this one catalogued deep in a library's holdings. And if you recall that Che Yun works at Harvard University, perhaps you'll know a similar book, or you'll know of a similar book there. If you don't, no matter, because Che Yun's story, Rot, is what you want to know. Welcome, Che Yun.
Thank you so much. Tell me about the weakest man, Mozzie once said. So I told her about the man who hated my vagina. It wasn't tight enough. That's what he kept saying. Make it tighter, clench it, clench me. He said it was too big. He couldn't come inside. There wasn't enough friction. So instead he jacked off on my chest. I pushed them together like this and he came like this, and it was the same every single time. I sang a song in my head while it happened. Mozzie interrupted me. What song? It was more of a nursery rhyme. What rhyme? It's not really words. Let me hear. She released my arm. So I chanted my secret chant that I had never performed for anyone else before. I wondered if everyone had an inner language like mine, to sing and rhyme and survive the fucking of someone unfuckable. That sounds kind of cool, she said. What about my vagina? It's not too big. Bigger. It could be bigger. They should all get bigger until they end civilization. Next one, she said. Tell me about the man who comes to mind right now. I told her about the man who lived far away. An hour on the bus, then another hour on the train. I passed through 9 tunnels, over 2 bridges, past 6 gas stations just to see him. I left early in the morning. I left my mother alone at home. Abandoned her when she was most afraid of the changes happening to her body. Just to fuck him. Slipped out and came home whenever, without notice or warning. It didn't feel so cruel back then. She could still hear from one of her ears. She still enjoyed talking, going to the butcher, watching TV. She could still smell something burning in the kitchen before the entire pot of soup turned to carbon. The whole pot, a black brick. I never understood that, how she lost her sound and then her smell. You read about it being the other way around, that one sense gets taken away and then the others compensate. They get sharper. But for her, nothing got sharper. One got taken away and eventually the others followed. Mozzie interrupted again. Your mother is everywhere in our conversations now. I'm sorry. You should go there and pull some weeds. Graves need weeding, you know. No. I'll do the weeding then. You can cry and let it all out and feel the eternal pearl of her spirit. And I'll just hover nearby with gardening gloves, just as a friend. Your friend, your good friend. Never. So you're never going to check or just bring some dumb polyester flowers? Not ever? I mean never as in you will never be a good friend. She took my hand and placed it over her ear. She rubbed my palm up and down, from her temple to her jaw, back and forth. The more I held it, the less I cared for her face, the less I cared for mine. Faces didn't belong between people. Faces belonged in childhood pictures, identification cards, funerals. Faces belonged to everyone else. Faces were nothing like voices, which rose from the unreachable depth of our guts. I wished I could hold her voice instead. Whatever, she said finally, I would be an awesome friend. Yeah? Yeah. If I was your friend, I'd force you to go see your mother with carnations and booze. And if you still said no, I'd go myself. I'd take care of it all myself. And then when you died, I would bury you next to her. Sometimes in my secret fuck language, I told Mozzie about herself. In my tongue of one, I told her about the person she was. Someone who is not the weakest or the worst or the strangest or the one who comes to mind after years and years, but someone who is just someone, a someone who happens to be the one I'm spending this indeterminate phase of my life with. You are not terrible, I said to her, and you are not amazing. I wonder what happens to people like you. If you are not to be punished or rewarded, what are you to be? Someday I will tell someone about the person that I am. I am someone who remembers every spider, every fly and mantis and mosquito from childhood. I miss their feet that stuck to our walls with a million bristles, their bones which they're forced to wear on the outside. I miss them on my window, my pillow, my neck, my knee. One summer night, after my mother had fallen asleep next to me, I snuck out of bed to open the windows. And then I flipped on the lights. I waited for the bugs to fly in. I wanted to see a swarm. I wanted all the bugs of my childhood to appear before me in one place. But the only thing that came in was a lizard. It crawled up to our ceiling and ran by the lights. That's when my mother woke up. She screamed. She leapt onto a tall chair. I laughed and shook the legs of the chair to make her scream some more. She found pencils on the nearest shelf. She threw the pencils like spears. It made me laugh harder until one pencil landed on its mark. The lizard dropped to the floor. Still she was screaming. The lizard wasn't. The lizard had given up its tail. It was paralyzed by fear, or maybe it was just really, really calm. The tail was not calm. It was wriggling around on its own. It flapped like a netted fish. I am someone who thinks of that tail every time she gives her body, who cannot stop wriggling and looking for the rest of her. Thank you.
Thank you, Che. Each issue of AGNI is a collaboration. It's wonderful to look across this audience and see others who have work in this issue, others who have worked on this issue, and then writers from past issues, donors to the magazine, longtime readers, old grad school friends of mine, I noticed. It's a wonderful group. I've been thinking today about the group of people that I'm so fortunate to work with at AGNI, the other people on the masthead. I think of us as a group of kind of frontline sharers. We are constantly looking for work like the work you heard tonight. And when we discover it, that's worth nothing without being able to share it. And we share it with each other first. And then that sharing ripples out to all of you, to our readers, to our audience. So I want to just thank the people I work with. Thanks to the readers who read tonight. We normally have about 55 bios or so at the back of an issue. This time we have 96. It's a remarkable thing. Thanks to the editors who introduced everybody tonight, and thanks to Cynthia Eyeza, who manages the chat for us. She also helps make the blog function. And I just wanted to remind everybody, if you use PN06, that will stay live all night. It's Paul Nancy 06, 06. And that's if you order a subscription on our website. Thank you very much, everybody. As Daniel said, thanks for being here deep into a Wednesday evening when you could be doing other things. We were honored to have your company. Good night.